Hello, this video is to share with you the guidelines that the Social Emotional Learning Reentry Task Force has developed for how we can address the social and emotional learning needs of our staff, students, and families as we head back to school for the 2020-2021 school year. The Social Emotional Learning Reentry Task Force is comprised of Darcy Becker, Mara Marano-Bianco, Joe Callahan, and myself, Joanna Rockwood. I'm now going to stop the video so as not to distract from the presentation. First, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. As I am in Edmonds, this is the Coast Salish peoples, and I would like to honor with gratitude the land itself and the Coast Salish people. If you'd like to learn more about the Coast Salish people, you can visit this link. And if you were not in Edmonds as you were watching this video, I highly encourage you to click the second link here to determine what Indigenous territory you are located on and acknowledge the land appropriately. So what will it look like? As we are not sure what it's going to look like as we return into the fall, and more specifically, if we might need to float back and forth in between the different models, that we kind of need a framework in order to address all three. So these are the three different scenarios that come from OSPI's Reopening Washington Schools 2020 District Planning Guide. Continuous Learning 2.0 and what that might look like, a hybrid version and what that might look like, and then also face-to-face instruction. As we come back, there are twofold needs. One, responding to the long-term crisis during the school closure, which includes a global pandemic and community unrest, and then also engaging in ongoing social emotional learning practices throughout the school year. The PREPARE model and response is a great way to be able to frame this. Our district is trained and uses the National Association of the School Psychologists PREPARE Crisis Response Model. If you want to learn more about that particular model, you can click this handout, and it talks about how this particular model is applied directly to the global pandemic, and it walks you through each acronym and what the response should be in each one of those areas. The psychological first aid for schools is a great way for us to be able to respond to the crisis, and it helps to lessen and respond to traumatic events. And so it helps people move through the trauma and be able to get through and back into normal functioning. And then the trauma-informed practices and the multi-tiered systems of support, or the MTSS framework, are ways in which we can address and respond more long-term to the needs of our staff, students, and families. So the psychological and emotional recovery plan is a way for us to be able to identify universal screening tools for staff, students, and families who need support. This is a way in which we can prioritize our needs and respond to them in the most appropriate way and identify the highest concern, moderate, and lower concern. We need to identify and deliver responsive social and emotional learning supports, and we need to ensure that these practices are equitable and racially sensitive. If you click on this link, it will send you to a social emotional learning and equity pitfalls and recommendations, which is a really great tool to have for implementing any type of social emotional learning practices to ensure that we are being sensitive. And then we also need to plan for any type of memorialization procedures that might be happening in buildings regarding any student or staff deaths that might have happened during the building closure. So psychological first aid for schools has 5 different components which are summarized above. We have listen. We need to allow them to share experiences and express their feelings and concerns for safety. Protect. This is where we help reestablish feelings of psychological, physical, and emotional safety. Connect. We really need to reestablish social relationships, plug back in, and stay connected for ongoing social support. And then we need to model. We need to demonstrate a positive and optimistic approach, which part of this includes good self-care. And then we need to teach. We can teach them common reactions and then a range of normal reactions and when to seek help, and then give them resources when to do so. If you are interested in the psychological first aid cultural specific information, you can click this link down here below. And then if you would like to learn a little bit more, there is a psychological first aid tip sheet, which if you click that link, it will send you here, that kind of breaks down the core elements of the model. And then it talks about 10 tips for implementing each element in the school setting. There is also a district psychological first aid for schools 101 training that is going to be coming soon, which will break this down into a little bit more concrete and easier definitions. But if you're interested in getting a more in-depth kind of crisis response training in regards to this particular model, there are 2 different free webinars, which the links, hyperlinks are located right there for you. So if we use the psychological first aid for schools framework to address the needs for administrators, staff, students, and families, you can see this framework here in which we can check to see and make sure that we are addressing all 5 components of the psychological first aid model. Now, most of buildings and staff and teachers are doing this, and they don't really quite know that they're actually doing this. So this is just a framework to help identify what you are doing and if you have any holes in any of the other areas, and to provide a set of resources if you feel like you might need them. If you click here for the framework spreadsheet, you will see that the task force has developed a sample. And so in regards to what you can do in each one of these areas, and then our next work is going to be talking about specific tools, which we will then link to hyperlinks for you in each one of these areas. There is also down here on the tabs button a blank version if you would like to fill this out for yourself as a building or as a teacher to make sure that you feel comfortable as to what you're doing in those 5 areas. Again, most people are doing this. They just have not looked through this particular lens, and so this is a good tool to help you do that. And then whenever we talk about providing any types of interventions or strategies and practices, we all want to make sure that we are addressing all the needs of our students. And so if we look for strategies and practices, we can think of this in levels of tiers. Tier 1 is for all students or all staff. What are we doing to address the needs for everybody? And then typically what they say is about 80% of the people with given tier 1 interventions will what we call return to the norm. Recovery is the norm. So they will settle down on their own. But there is about 20% that tend to need a little bit more extra support. And so for that, we move on to tier 2, which is where you can provide some extra support for those in addition to tier 1. And then there will be kind of the unique 5% that might need some more individualized or tier 3 support. And so we have also created a spreadsheet here so that you can list kind of what strategies and practices and or resources and notes that you might have. And we broke it down here on the bottom into an administration tab, a staff tab, a students and a families tab, so that you can keep track of what your individual building is doing in regards to responding to those tiered needs. And this is really the MTSS model in which we are making sure that we are addressing and responding to those needs. So trauma-informed practices should be embedded as a part of our ongoing social and emotional work and practice. There's a great school conference that a lot of district staff went to that will be bringing back current and recommended practices. We can also provide training on signs of trauma. And again, this needs to be woven into an MTSS framework and ongoing social emotional practices. The social, emotional, and trauma responsiveness practices, we need to ensure that it is used in all content areas and that it also includes racialized trauma and community impacts. So here is a sample of what most buildings use, which is the multi-tiered systems of support, or it's also called problem-solving team. And this is for students. This is what it would look like for students in regards to what are some supports we can give when it comes to social and emotional learning in Tier 1, and then Tier 2, and then Tier 3. And this is a way for us to be able to ensure that we are addressing the needs of all those students, whether they are recovering to the norm or might need a little bit more extra support or might need more individualized support. So what are the next steps? There are two different, so the social and emotional reentry task force next steps are we're going to be compiling some concrete and simple district-wide tools for you guys. And we will be including embedding those into some spreadsheets and then also looking in regards to student and staff screeners. We also, another tool that has come to our attention is to create a 6-week planning template for all of the Job-alike groups to be looking through and giving their input in regards to what might be some nice tools for that. And then we will be also creating this video presentation as well as Ecological First Aid 101 training. And then for the Job-alike teams, we really are encouraging the use of this SEL reentry framework in planning for reentry, and then give input on the tasks within the 6-week planning template, and also of the learning for social emotional needs, and then provide ongoing feedback to the SEL reentry task force. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but rather a place to start our work as we move forward. And so these are the references that we used, and there are the main documents in creating this framework, which is a mix of recommendations, current practices, and evidence-based models. You can click on any of these links to go directly to them and find out more. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you found this video helpful.